Why not? And we're recording. Okay, so good morning. This is the last class. So what I'm going to do for this Zoom meeting is just to give an opportunity for people to ask any last minute questions. Um, um, and for today or for the next hour, just wanted to run through some questions from the home and yung coverage for the final. The final exam is in January. I think sinulit ko January 15. Basta nasa announcements siya. And then yung actual room, sinabi na sa akin via email, pero i-announce ko ulit yung actual room. And it's not gonna be 103. So yun. So hindi na tayo magkikita after today. And then, in fact, I probably won't check any communications until January 1st week, January 3. But today I'll be fielding some questions, checking email, and talking to people. Okay. So having said that, let us share a screen, and sharing your screen will close the whiteboard. Yes. And then let us share something. Nasaan yun? Ito. And malagay ko lang dito yung page. Page 219. And then 379. Okay, I think may tanong. Okay, what can I do if my conflict schedule on January 15? I also have an exam from 10 to 12. Actually, umaga tayo. 8 to 10. Actually. Pero dahil sinabi mo, Shannon, mayroon kang exam ng 10 o'clock. Oh yeah, pwede tayo i-start ng stricto ng 8 o'clock. No problem. Actually. Kasi inisip ko na baka may mga late. Kaya 8:30. So 8:30 to 10:30 ganun. Pero since may mga taong may conflict, let's just shift it all the way to 8. So let me write that down. Make it 8 a.m. Got it. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm presenting the book right now. You all should be seeing the book, and the coverage will be as follows. So mahalaga kasi na balikan natin si Chapter 5, Open Economy. So lahat ng mga concepts na nandun, you have to be aware of it. Okay? So let's just do it right now. Okay. So magre-review. This is just a review. Okay. And we'll just go through it very quickly. This is Chapter 5. Everything here is quite important. So in particular, net exports, right? Where you get net exports equals output minus domestic spending, or the famous IS relationship. S minus I equals NX, okay, which is the key thing here. Okay. And iintindihin natin doon. And remember, we also have a discussion on a Word document, which I have uploaded, yung balance of payments. And the NX there is essentially the the current account. And what's cool here is it gives an example here about what is going on in the S minus I relationship, right? So for example, here, what happens when there's an export of the United States? You can think about it as exports ng Philippines then. And then what America will get is basically foreign exchange, the 5,000 yen. But this 5,000 yen is also a reflection of the net capital outflow na sinasabi dito sa chapter na to. So there's no contradiction between our discussion on BOP and this one, in that those two things, the accumulation of foreign exchange and net capital outflow coming from a capital account surplus, are exactly the same thing, but different words ang ginagamit. And then here we have the small open economy assumption, really important. And for Mundell threading specifically, we will have R is equal to R star, okay, where R star is the world interest rate. And then you should understand what a small open economy is. And then mababalik tayo dito sa chapter 5 model, which is basically the classical model here, wherein S equals I, and then the difference happens to be the capital account or the trade surplus in the language of the book. So in this case, this is what is this? S is greater than I, and therefore this is a trade surplus. And X is positive here in this picture. Okay, and then we will have to shift curves in this model. And that will affect NX. Okay, what else? The other thing that's really important here is exchange rates. And I just wanted to remind everyone that yung exchange rates dito is based on the United States. So whenever the exchange rate and the real exchange rate is defined this way, what's the expression for the real exchange rate? It's this one. The real exchange rate equals the nominal times the ratio of the price levels. So in this case, P over P star. Okay, P star happens to be the foreign price. Okay. What else? P is the domestic price. The domestic price happens to be the United States in this example. And yung sinasabi lang natin is that everything goes through, it's the same model, except that when it comes to the Philippines point of view, kailangan either i-flip mo siya, right? Or i-reverse mo yung interpretation. Because when the real exchange rate here goes up, that means nag-appreciate ang US dollar. Pero nagdi-depreciate ang Philippine peso. Right? Or you can flip this by doing 1 over E, and then it's exactly the same. Pag umakyat yung 1 over E, that's an appreciation of the Philippine peso. All right, so chapter 5 is really important. Okay, determinants of the nominal exchange rate. The nominal exchange rate. Purchasing power parity is also something, an important concept to understand. And may chat message tayo. Oh, si Roj has a thing from January 15. So for the people who might have an additional conflict, it's okay kasi meron tayong afternoon din. So I'm also here in the afternoon. And in particular, I'll be doing another set of exams for the other class in the afternoon, starting at 1 o'clock in 103. So let me write that down. I'll let everyone know where that other class is, but it's the same day in the afternoon. So any questions on the conflict pagdating sa afternoon, especially to Roj and perhaps to Shannon? So pwede rin kayong makisali dun sa afternoon. As long as 2 hours ang i-google niyo sa exam. Wait. Thank you, Roj. Okay, so anyway, that's it. And that's it for chapter 5. And you don't have to study the large open economy necessarily, except for the one in chapter 12, which is yung pupuntahan natin ngayon. So after 5, after chapter 5, the open economy, you'll want to review all of the short run stuff, chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 11, But the most important one really is chapter 12. And since chapter 11, 10, 11, and 12 are intimately related, you should really remember 10 and 11 also. But it's really yung 12 and 13, yun yung dalawang mahalagang chapter, which we will review right now. Mundell-Fleming. So si Mundell-Fleming is basically ISLM, but with an open economy flavor to it and with a small open economy assumption. And then at the end of this chapter, we'll do a question from the homework. Parang practice lang. Oh, let me chap my question. I think I'll join the afternoon, says Shannon. Okay, yeah, why not? So anyone who wants to do the afternoon, lalo na kung may conflict sila sa umaga, then they can easily do the afternoon, no problem. Oh, in that case, pwede na lang, para hindi rin mahirapan yung iba, baka pwedeng 8:30. Hindi naman, I don't want to be super strict sa time. So, pwedeng 8:30 pumas. Mag-start tayo ng 8:30 para hindi stress. And then, matapos ng 10:30. Okay, so here's the explanation of the Mundell-Fleming model. Key assumption is perfect capital mobility and small open economy. So that means the R must be equal to R. If they're not, then capital will flow in the direction of the higher interest rate, higher real interest rate. And here is the IS star curve. Notice that, Notice that sa chapter 12, lahat ng IS tsaka LM may star, just to differentiate it from the closed economy version. And then meron kang NX, which is a function of the real exchange rate. And again, the real exchange rate here is from the point of view of the United States. Pag lumaki siya, if E becomes bigger, it's an appreciation. If E becomes smaller, that's a depreciation. Okay, so here's the IS curve under Mundell-Fleming, where now your y-axis is a function of E. And your y-axis is E, and then your x-axis is GDP or real output or Y. And then here you have the LM star curve. And if you notice that E is not here, and then R is equal to R star, and therefore you usually write R star here. So LM is actually a function of that global interest rate, R star. And then when you put it together, LM curve is basically a vertical line at Y, whatever the Y happens to be, which closes or clears the money market at a given R star. And therefore, here's your equilibrium. And then on the y-axis, exchange rate, and on the x-axis is GDP. And then there are two regimes, floating. So floating means E is free to adjust. And then fixed means you have to keep E at that level. And how do you keep E at that level? Through monetary policy. So may mga examples dito under floating. So here you've got an expansionary policy, which shifts IS to the right, and that will raise the exchange rate. Leave real GDP unchanged. Okay. And so my question is this: what happens to NX, or the current account deficit, or the trade balance? Pag nagkaroon ka ng, what's going on? Appreciation. What's going to happen to the trade balance? Yeah, so I'm asking questions now, and feel free to just speak. Pag nagkaroon ka ng appreciation, ano mangyayari sa trade balance? So this is some of the basic stuff that we all need to know. May sumagot sa chat. It will worsen the trade balance. It will raise imports. It will make it more negative. Great. So in fact, that's the story, right? It will worsen the trade balance, and it will exactly offset yung fiscal expansion that started it, right? So if government goes up, NX goes down, completely offsets, kaya Y is constant. Remember, Y equals ano, C plus I plus G plus NX. So kung magtaas si G, bababa si NX, constant si Y. Okay. So whenever you're given this kind of scenario, we'll be asking you to, talk about all of those different things, like what happens to Y, what happens to NX, what happens to G, what happens to ganito, ganyan. Okay. So that's other than drawing the picture, you need to come up with, yung implications ng picture on all of the macro variables. And okay, so here's monetary policy naman on a flexible exchange rate. So an expansion means you're shifting the LM curve to the right, the money supply goes up. Okay, what happens next? Well, because R is equal to R star, the only thing that can adjust is E. Okay, so if M goes LM star 1 goes to LM star 2. In the money market, basically, if R is equal to R star, the only thing that will adjust is Y. And therefore, in IS curve, in order to increase Y, something has to happen. There has to be a depreciation of E para tumaas ang, ano mangyayari pag nag-depreciate ang E? Yung kabaliktaran, kanina. Instead of worsening it, it'll make it bigger. And that's why Y grows here. Because Y will grow because LM moves to the right. Y has to grow to meet the equilibrium in the money market. And in order for that to happen, there has to be a depreciation in order for NX to go up and for Y to in fact go up. So that's the key. So kailangan parehong equilibrium sa LM and sa IS. So that's why it moves, the equilibrium moves from this point to this point. Okay. So yun yung flavor ng kwento. Okay. So in the model, the equilibrium has to be told both in the LM side, the money market side, and the goods market side. And this is the picture that allows you to tell the story on those two markets at the same time. Go back. And then you have a bunch of other stuff. Here's the trade restriction. Shifts the NX curve outward. Meaning you're limiting imports. Now, we'll go on to the fixed exchange rate situation, wherein here's the situation, right? Instead of E being, ito pa rin siya, it's still the same. This y-axis is still E. But now you have to draw a line to remind yourself na, hey, fixed yung E. So actually, that E cannot be different. So yung mag-a-adjust is not E, but somehow Y. So dito lahat ng movement. Okay? At kung mag-a-adjust, kung may adjustment, mag-a-adjust si Y. So in this case, if the equilibrium exchange rate is up here, for example, and then yung gusto mong i-defend na fixed exchange rate is down here, that implies the LM curve must shift to the right, and that is an expansion of money supply at this point, right? And if it's the opposite picture here. If the equilibrium exchange rate is here, kita mo equilibrium siya kasi LM is equal to IS, right? The real exchange rate is in fact lower than the fixed exchange rate here in panel B. And what's going to happen is that there's going to be a shift to the left of the LM curve. And whenever there's a shift to the left of the LM curve, that's because why? Can someone say why will LM shift left in this case or shift right in this case? What is changing to make LM shift left or right? No, because the exchange rate is fixed. So what is the thing that's changing that will keep the exchange rate fixed? Ito yung gumagalaw yung LM. I mean, that's clear, right? Gumagalaw ang LM, but what is changing sa LM? And there's only two things sa LM, right? Or actually three things. R star, Y, and what's the third one? There's only three things in the LM equation, right? Because it's the money market equilibrium. So meron kang demand for money and then meron kang what? Someone say, supply of real balances, right? M over P. So ano yung gumagalaw pag nag-shift yung LM curve? On the right, on the left side, it's shifting right. And here on panel B, it's shifting left. On panel A, it's shifting right. So what's changing? Okay, so there has to be a change in the supply of money because of buying and selling currency. So that's what's happening. The central bank has to buy and sell currency in order to fix the exchange rate. And that is what will automatically either expand the money supply. Here on the right side, expansion ng money supply. That means they're selling US dollars dito, they're expanding. And then this one is they're shrinking the money supply. So they're buying US dollars from the market, diminishing the supply of money. Sa Philippines, pareho lang rin. If it's here, then you are, what's happening to pesos as you're increasing the money supply? Is the central bank selling pesos or buying pesos? How will the money supply out there grow? But this is the growth in the money supply. Pag nag-grow ang money supply, Philippine context, anong ginagawa ng BSP? On net, it is selling or buying pesos? Yeah, selling pesos because you want pesos out there and you want dollars and other foreign currency inside the bank. And that's what's happening, right? Okay. So that's why there's more pesos out there because the bank is essentially selling pesos or buying dollars in this case, right? Yeah. So mahalaga na maintindihan natin yung actions na nangyayari to keep the exchange rate here. And yun rin yung mahalaga kung bakit sinasabi natin na pag fixed, your monetary policy is basically gone. You cannot do an expansionary monetary policy alone because you need to use the money supply basically to fix the exchange rate. So the money will either grow or shrink here, depending on whether the equilibrium is below or above yung target na fixed exchange rate. Okay, so there's a good explanation here. And here are some pictures that will help us understand the situation more. So here is a fiscal expansion under fixed exchange rate. So remember, itong horizontal line na to, that's the fixed E. Okay? So hindi na pwede magbago yung E. Kailangan nandyan talaga siya. So that's your first clue. The E has to be there. So if you have an expansion of fiscal expansion, that will shift the IS curve to the right. Okay? And normally, if nothing else happens, magkakaroon ka ng appreciation. Dito yung equilibrium. But that can't be. And therefore, if this is your new equilibrium, then the LM curve must shift to the right. And that's an expansion of the money supply. And that will expand income or increase income. Okay. Same thing here with monetary expansion under fixed exchange rates. Basically, it cannot be done because the moment na mag-shift to the right ang LM, it will have to shift to the left back to keep the exchange rate at that level. So that's why you have this U-turn arrow here. It's a figure 12-9. Oh, of course, there's another kind of monetary policy that's available. It's the revaluation. Pwede ka mag-devalue ng currency. And then devalue is when you change the exchange rate by setting it lower, right? Okay, so that's what a devaluation of the currency is. Pag may fixed rate ka, you set it lower. And that's a form of monetary policy under fixed exchange rates. Ito siya, si devaluation and an increase in the official value is called a revaluation. Okay, and then this 12-1, very important, right? This is basically the summary of everything, right? Floating and fixed, fiscal expansion, monetary expansion, and import restriction. Almost anything that you can play with in the model is here in this particular table. So let's go for the import restriction. Again, import restriction sort of expands NX because it limits your I. And what's going to happen under floating is that it's going to increase E, or an appreciation in the real exchange rate. And under floating, but then Y and NX is unchanged. Okay. So that means if you're restricting imports, magkakaroon ka ng appreciation which will lower NX back, basically. So yung change ng NX on net will be zero. Yun yung nangyari, basically. Lumiit nga yung imports mo, pero lumiit rin yung exports mo, basically. So, ano lang nangyari sa NX, yun ang nangyari dito, right? Dito sa fixed, NX goes up because of that import restriction, and Y goes up because when NX goes up, Y will go up, and then E is unchanged. So, walang countervailing na appreciation. Exports are allowed to increase in this case, right? And NX is allowed to increase under this case. So, this is the last row here. Yeah, so my suggestion is this is pretty much the most important table in this chapter, so chapter 12. And then here is more of I would say conceptual interest rate differentials, where you should think about country risks and exchange rate expectations. And then here, the theta is essentially the country risk premium. And everything still works pretty much the same. An increase in the risk premium associated with the country drives up the interest rate, because higher interest rate reduces investment. The IS curve shifts to the left. So IS1 to IS2 star, because it also reduces money demand because R goes up. The LM curve shifts to the right, income rises, and the currency depreciates. So dalawang mangyayari, moving from this IS1 to the left and from this LM to the right. And ultimately, that will lower the value of the real exchange rate, and it will increase Y. Here's a question. Okay, so Shannon said, could we clarify again why NX goes up in trade restriction? May nakaharang dito, hindi ko makita, sorry. But not in FP? Fixed, ano yung FP? Flexible.
Sorry.
I guess you're talking about flexible versus fixed, right?
Fiscal policy po, sir.
Fiscal policy. Okay, good. So why NX goes up in trade restriction but not in FP? So see, trade restriction, pag floating siya, so the first thing it will shift the NX. Actually, may picture tayo.
Sa fixed po, sir.
To fixed?
Yes po.
Oh, so here's the trade restriction under fixed exchange rates. So yung mangyayari is there's going to be a shift to the right. Okay, but that's not the end, right? Because of the fixed exchange rate, let me just move the meeting chat thing. The LM curve will shift to the right, okay? And then that will raise the income. Because of the accommodation ng LM, nag-shift siya to the right, na-fix mo yung exchange rate, so therefore nothing actually happens to the real exchange rate, okay? But what will happen is there's going to be an increase in NX because you still restrict the imports, okay? So basically, if you restrict the imports, lalaki pa rin yung NX, because remember, NX is exports minus imports. So if imports goes down, then that will mean that NX basically goes up, right? So that's why NX goes up and then Y goes up under the fixed exchange rate here. Meanwhile, sa fiscal expansion, okay, walang nangyari sa NX. So there's no restriction on NX, so there's nothing that happened. So what happened under fiscal expansion is the G goes up, right? So when G goes up, then Y will go up, and then E is fixed, right? And since E is fixed under the fiscal expansion, then NX will also not change because NX is a function of the real exchange rate, right? Nagkaroon lang ng change ng NX dito because of the import restriction, which by the definition of the term import restriction is you're limiting imports or you're decreasing your imports. And by decreasing imports, you mechanically increase your NX. I hope that answers your question, Shannon. That's basically the difference between fiscal expansion and import restriction in the fixed regime here. Oh, implies an increase in net exports. So I was wondering why do you increase for fiscal policy when Y goes up? So when income rises, savings rises, and implies an increase in net exports. Oh, okay. Got it. What else? Oh, wait. Okay, so when the income... So here's the thing. I don't know where this is from, pero there are two models, right? One is the classical model and one is the income short-run determination model. So we're talking about the short-run income determination model here where Y can essentially change, right? Pero dun sa classical, Y is fixed. So kung may changes sa consumption or sa G, yung magbabago yung savings rate, pero the Y is essentially unchanged. So that is also one of the things na we all should remember, basically. That in the models that we're considering here, dito sa chapter 12, Y can basically change. Okay, so changes in G can change Y. But in the classical model, changes in the savings decision is basically a reallocation ng Y. If you want to save more, then you will essentially invest less, basically. I'm sorry, if you save more, you consume less. But if you save more, you invest more because S equals I. Okay. Under the classical model na fixed yung Y. Pero dito, nagbabago yung Y depending on, well, it depends on the regime and ISLM and so on and so forth. Right? Okay, so some concepts here dito sa 12-5. So merong mga pros and cons of the different exchange rate systems. Okay, so this is mainly conceptual. So what is dollarization? What is a currency board? Stuff like that. That's pretty important stuff. And then here's the impossible trinity, which is also an important one. In fact, I think the key concept dito, free capital flows, independent monetary policy, and fixed exchange rate cannot all be possible. So you're only on one side of this triangle here. So that's the message of this one. So if you want fixed exchange rate, you must either have an independent monetary policy or free capital flows. So in the models that we've been discussing so far, may free capital flows, R is equal to R star, and may fixed, and therefore wala kang independent monetary policy. Yun yung ISLM Mundell-Fleming model na ginagamit natin ngayon, which is free capital flows and the fixed exchange. Nandito tayo. Typically under fixed. And then we've got the movement to the long run, which is exactly the same as the ISLM. So that's why we wanted to say, okay, buta tayo sa ISLM because it's basically the same thing. Price appears only in the LM curve because that will change the real money balances, the supply of money in the system. And when prices change, basically your Y will change and this will create the aggregate demand, downward sloping aggregate demand. Same story sa ISLM except that now may exchange rate sa Y-axis. Okay. But it's exactly the same thing when the price changes, a fall in the price shifts the LM curve to the right, expanding Y, a fall in that's reflected here in aggregate demand. The fall in the price expands one. And here we will do, this is a simplification for these chapters. Remember, yung short-run aggregate supply in our model is not flat, but it's upward sloping, right? Because of models of imperfect information or sticky prices, right? Okay. So this is an approximation, okay, which will be sort of reversed in chapter 13. But this story here of adjustment from the short run to the long run, pareho lang talaga siya dun sa ISLM. So that's why bumalik kayo dun ulit, and it's basically the same idea. Okay. So why don't we try to do one, which I think is part of your homework. Okay. So para lang to make sure everyone gets it. Ano ba to? Under floating and fixed, let's say meron kang fall in consumer confidence. So let me just now shift towards the whiteboard. I assume I can find the whiteboard. Give me the whiteboard. Baka nandito siya sa new share. Whiteboard. Okay. Okay. So here's the whiteboard. We'll do Mundell-Fleming, right? Under fixed and floating, sabi natin, there is a fall in consumer confidence. And then you're going to be asked to draw the lines. I'm just going to draw something. Shapes. Why is this blue? I have no idea. Nope. And then what's the axis? What's the thing on the axis here? What's the label? What's the variable? Well, sa baba, it's y. Why can't I move this other one? Select this one. Okay, there you go. And the one on the y-axis is exchange rate. Thank you very much. Or real exchange rate, right? So, quick question, bakit sila pareho in the model? In the model, it's the nominal and the real are the same thing because prices are fixed in the model, right? Okay. In real life, of course, they're not the same. But to simplify the model, we'll have E, the nominal, and the real to be basically to be the same thing. Okay, so I want to draw another line. So fall in consumer confidence. Let me select this. I can't edit it anymore. This is my first time using this, so I have no idea. You can see. Never mind. So, spend less, save more. So C goes down, consumption falls, Y falls, right? Because Y equals C plus I plus G, etc. So therefore, for any given E, Y goes down, and that means there is a shift, what? Of IS. Okay, a downward shift. I was thinking actually of a leftward shift, but it's the same thing. So that means for E, for any given E, bababa ang Y. So that means, right? So for example, if the E is here, The Y is now here. So that's why consumption falls given E. So that's, pero pwede ring downward shift. It's essentially the same thing. We will draw a new line. How can we change the color of this thing? Napraning ako. Napapraning ako. Wala siyang kulay. Here we go. I think, yes. And then here is your new IS. It's a shift to the left. And it's IS2. And the color is red. Again, right? Okay, so let's do floating results. So under floating, pag ganyan, what will happen to E? E will, dalawa lang yan, up or down? Will, so what's down? What's the economics term for that? Depreciate, right? So we're asked to know, oh, let me just write down, sorry. Get, no, I want it to be blue. I want it to be blue. Get what happens to E, not E, Y, and X. Okay. Potentially you can do consumption too, but it's just too easy. Yeah, depreciate. Thank you. Okay, so as you can see, E will depreciate. Wow, I didn't realize that you cannot edit it anymore. Never mind. Two red. What happens to NX? NX will, again, pag nag-depreciate, bumura ang domestic currency, and then that will allow you to sell more or sell less abroad. Sell more, because now people can buy more of your things, right? Your things are now cheaper to foreigners. So NX will rise as C falls. So Y is constant. Also, the Y is constant is given here. So E, NX, C, and then Y. Pag fixed, of course, pag fixed, what's going to happen? E is fixed. E is unchanged. How is E unchanged though? Because LM must adjust. Okay. Specifically shifts something and it will shift left. Okay. So gagawa tayo ng bagong line. First mag-blue line muna tayo, and then this blue line is basically here. Right? So this represents the fixed E, right? This represents the fixed E, and then what's going to happen? What has to happen is there has to be a shift in the LM curve that will make that E happen. So it has to be here. And then you can call that LM2, the red. And then it's a shift left. So that means it's a decrease in money supply, and Y falls. What happens to NX? What happens to NX? NX will be constant. Why? Because what happens to E? Nothing, right? yung nx is a function of E. Nx is a function of E. And since E is unchanged, nx is also unchanged in this case. Yeah. Yeah, so that's basically it. Okay, so in the interest of time, we can move on. Okay, so the next important chapter really is chapter 13. So there's a video online for this, but we will again just go through all the big important points. So basically, meron na tayong aggregate supply curve, which is upward sloping in the short run. And there are a couple of models for that, the sticky price model and the explanations here. Basically, you've got some firms that are flexible and some firms that are sticky. So my annotations are still here. And then when you combine those two together, it will generate this aggregate supply curve, which is upward sloping, which is a function of S, which is the fraction of sticky price firms. And then another alternate theory, probably a complementary theory, is the imperfect information model. And what's important here is to explain it in terms of what's happening to prices. Are my prices, I'm a seller, are my prices, relative prices rising or falling relative to everyone else? Or is everyone's prices rising or falling? So if everyone's prices are rising and falling, then I don't need to change my Y. I don't need to change my output because it's not a relative price change. It's only when my goods are getting relatively higher demand, and that's why tumataas yung price. That's the time when I'm increasing my output. So she must therefore estimate the relative price. She's not sure whenever she observes the price of the product she is selling, she's not sure whether other prices have risen or whether only the price of asparagus has risen. When the price level rises unexpectedly, all suppliers in the economy observe increases in prices of the goods they produce. They all infer rationally but mistakenly that the relative price of the goods they produce have risen. They work hard and produce more. Okay, so that's the key of why upward sloping yung supply. Because some firms think that it's a relative price change and not an overall price change in the short run. Okay. And then here's the plot, right? The graph of the short run aggregate supply curve. And then this is an important one. This is the movement from the short run to the long run. So the long run is always based on the classical model, which is y equals y bar, where y bar is the long run output of the economy. And then what will happen here is that if there's a shift to the right of aggregate demand, what's going to happen is there's going to be a movement from A to B. And then in the long run, it's going to be from A to C, right? And the movement from the short run to the long run will be basically an adjustment in expectations. Okay. So in the long run, your expectations on the price are equal to the actual price. And at that equal expectations, Y also has to be equal to Y bar. Because we can read the text here, because the price level of P2, this is P2, is above the expected price level, expected P2, which happens to be the old price. Okay? That's why tumaas, right? That's why tumaas ang supply. That's why we're moving along the aggregate supply curve here. In the long run, the expected price level rises to P3 because this P3 is the one that is consistent with Y bar. The second big concept is the Phillips curve. So the Phillips curve is related to aggregate supply by essentially turning the price and the expected price, which is the one before, into inflation and expected inflation. And inflation is a function of expected inflation minus this beta times cyclical unemployment plus a supply shock. Right. So that's where we've arrived at here, which is inflation is a function of expected inflation plus this cyclical output term, and then the supply shock here, which can be turned into unemployment here. What's important here is that here's an output gap, and this is the relationship of unemployment to the long run level of unemployment. So there's a deviation of output from its natural level is inversely related to the deviation of unemployment from its natural rate, the natural rate of unemployment. So here you've got adaptive expectations. So E pi is a function of last period's inflation. So that's why it's called adaptive inflation. So these are important concepts. I'm looking for the other concept, which is rational expectations, but I think that will come in later. Okay, so two causes of rising and falling inflation. You've got the demand side and the supply side, or the cost related inflation based on the Phillips curve. Then you've got the short run trade-off between inflation and unemployment. So yung slope ng Phillips curve is basically the coefficient on the cyclical unemployment component, right? The beta is the coefficient on that. Yun yung slope ng Phillips curve. And the sacrifice ratio is defined here. The results of these studies are often summarized in a number called the sacrifice ratio, the percentage of a year's real GDP that must be foregone to reduce inflation by 1 percentage point. So you can also express the sacrifice ratio in terms of unemployment, in terms of a change of 1 percentage point in unemployment rate translates into, therefore, reducing inflation by 1% requires 2.5% percentage points of cyclical unemployment. So this paragraph basically says that you can think about it in terms of output loss, or because of Okun's law, which relates output to unemployment, you can relate it to an increase in unemployment that you have to generate in order to lower your inflation by 1 percentage point. The next paragraph is also important. We can use the sacrifice ratio to estimate how much and for how long unemployment must rise. If reducing inflation by 1% requires a sacrifice of 5% of a year's GDP, reducing inflation by 4 percentage points requires a sacrifice of 20% of a year's GDP. Equivalently, the reduction in inflation requires a sacrifice of 10 percentage points of cyclical unemployment. So parang ginawa lang niyang overtime. All right. Oh, rational expectations is here. So instead of adaptive expectations, an alternate theory of setting expectations called rational expectations. Monetary and fiscal policies influence inflation. Expected inflation should depend on the policies that are in effect, and those understanding of what the effects of those policies have on the price level and inflation is basically the theory of rational expectation. Okay, so this is the important paragraphs here. Advocates of rational expectations argue that the short-run Phillips curve does not accurately represent the options that policymakers have available. They believe that if policymakers are credibly committed to reducing inflation, rational people will understand the commitment and will quickly lower their expectations of inflation, right? So remember that let's go back to the Phillips curve, which is here, right? There's two ways of affecting current inflation. One is by doing the sacrifice ratio and increasing unemployment, or if this were Y, you would decrease Y relative to the long run Y. But if you're able to influence expectations of inflation here, then you don't need to sacrifice anything, because if you want to, you could change expectation pi, and that itself would affect current inflation, right? So there's two ways of doing it. It's either you affect expectations here, or you affect unemployment or output, and incurring that short run sacrifice or short run trade-off. And the affecting inflation expectations is what rational expectations is all about. And if you're able to affect E pi, then you are able to affect pi today. So you're not necessary, you don't have to sacrifice here on the side. So that's the point of rational expectations. The theory. So that's rational expectations there. There does not have to be a trade-off under rational expectations and under a commitment by the monetary authority. All right, and then the last important concept here is hysteresis. So in other words, if there is a change in aggregate demand, a change in output and employment, there will be permanent scarring in the economy, and that will change either Y bar, the long run Y, or the long run level of unemployment. And it can have these effects because you might lose people with valuable skills. It will change the process that determine wages. Okay. And therefore the unemployment, the natural rate of unemployment will change. Okay, so let's talk about the sticky price model here, right? So let's talk about sticky price model. So let us talk about no firms have flexible prices, or S is equal to 1. So let's go back up. Pwede bang dalawa? Isusulat ko lang. Let's go back here. Dito na lang. We don't have to use the whiteboard. We can just go here. And boom, right? So this is the short run aggregate supply based on the sticky price model. P is on the y-axis, kaya nasa mag-isa lang siya. That's a dependent variable. And then y is the x, right? And this is the output gap. So what happens when S is equal or very, very close to 1? Can someone say if S is equal to very close to 1? What happens to this term when S is very, very close to 1? Anyone? Oh, you can put it. Well, the denominator becomes 1. So that's clear, right? That's cool. But then what happens to the numerator here? What does it become close to? 0. So if this becomes, the numerator becomes 0, may chat. Someone said 0, correct? And if the numerator becomes 0, then the coefficient here becomes what? 0. Exactly. Madiling lang to, guys. It's crazy. And then, so we can now go to the whiteboard with that sort of knowledge. How do I erase you? Here. Clear all drawings. Bye. Okay. So basically, that means pwede kang mag-drawing ngayon ng, wow, cool. Okay. Pwede pa lang dito. So here's the aggregate supply under the old aggregate supply, right? Aggregate supply, AS1. But when S becomes closer to 1, okay, what happens? What happens to the slope? What happens to the slope? T equals ET plus, say, I don't know, beta times Y minus Y bar, right? Where this is Y and this is T. Help me, right? And let's say that this is, gawa tayo ng isa pang line, gawa tayo ng isang line, pero ayaw natin yan, we want okay. This is gonna be Y bar, for instance, right? So what happens when S goes to 1? This beta becomes you already said it, 0, right? So when this line has a 0 slope, ano yon? Flat or steep? Flat, diba? So yeah, basically the AS curve, if I can just change its color, let's do purple. Kung yan yung AS1, as S becomes closer, right? AS flat. AS becomes flatter. Around Y bar, right? Around Y bar. Okay. Pretty much it. Any questions? That's pretty much it. Okay, great. Yun lang naman. And then, and then we'll go to growth. So after this, chapter 13. So do the concepts, the model. The model is very easy. Phillips curve or AS curve. And then we go to, let me just enter my 219. So this is chapter 7, economic growth. So babalikan lang natin to. I have yet to actually do the slides for the growth concepts. I will do that soon. Probably after this class. And then i-review lang natin to. And so this is very mathy. So expect some mathy questions. But then there's also some concepts here, right? So first key is production function stuff. Oh, okay. So let's do the share again. Thank you. So now we're sharing the book, chapter 7. Okay. So let's review just chapter 7. Chapter 8 is very straightforward, but we can get there. So see chapter 7, the supply of goods and the production function. So constant returns to scale, diminishing diminishing returns to capital, diminishing returns to labor. Okay. And then you can write everything in per worker terms here. And then this is what the production function looks like. And the slope is falling because of diminishing returns to capital. And then this is pretty important. Investment per person is basically fixed S. So S is some number that we can change. Fixed share of output per person. So this is the key graph here. So pansinin nyo that investment is S F of K, and then output is here, and then consumption is the gap, right? Because Y equal Y this is S, and then the difference between what you don't save, right? And output is what you consume. Oh, sorry. The difference between what you save and output is what you consume. What you save, you also invest, all of it. So that's why savings is equal to investment. Okay, so consumption is basically the difference between output and investment or savings. And this is the next important thing, right? You have the change in capital stock, which is investment. And by definition, investment means adding to capital stock. And then depreciation is how much capital stock naturally disappears, right? Over time. So that's why this is the adding to capital, the I, and this is the taking away from capital, which is depreciation. And you can put that together. And this is basically the same thing as the one above. The change in K is S F of K minus delta K. And the steady state is when the change of K is zero, meaning you're adding capital and you're taking away capital is is the same, right? The rate at which you add capital and the rate at which capital dies is the same. So that's why the change of K is zero. And that is that at that K, we call that the steady state level of capital, because at that K is no longer changing. So this is the equation in graph form. So ito si investment and ito si depreciation. And this is the steady state. If K is less than K star, then it will grow. And if K happens to be larger than K star, it will fall. And by fall, that just means you're not really, by fall, it means the depreciation rate is much higher than investment. So even as you're adding towards capital, your depreciation rate is much higher. So therefore, on net, it will limit your K. It will make your K fall to K star. Okay. So here is an example of the steady state. At the end of this, we'll be doing a numerical example. So that's the last thing we'll be doing this morning. So we'll be doing a numerical example. So I'll pause this. We also did this in class also, if you remember. So you can just look to your notes. We basically just did this in class. So let's not redo it. Okay, so this is an important concept. What happens when you change the savings rate? So there's two things that happen. First, what happens is that there's a change in the steady state. The higher you save, the higher your K star will be. So that means there's a level change in S, right? Your Y, your income per person in the long run in the steady state will be higher because your capital per person will be higher in the steady state. But the other thing that's important here is that there's also going to be a limited or not limited. There's going to be a growth effect, right? A higher an increase in savings rate raises growth only until the economy reaches the steady state. Okay, so what happens here is that when you're starting here and then you increase your savings like this, you will then increase the growth rate of the economy, right? But that growth rate in the economy will only increase until you hit K star, in which case, hindi na mag-grow yung output per person. Because by definition, K is constant, and therefore output per person is constant. At least in this version of Solo, right? So that's what this means. Higher saving leads to faster growth, but only temporarily, right? So only before you hit the K star. Okay, so the other thing here, which I will mention now, which I will mention in the slides or in the video I will make, is the farther away you are from K star, mas mabilis yung growth mo. Okay, you can see that here in this equation. Where is the equation here? So K, the change of K is essentially the change in Y. Okay? Kita niyo naman yun, di ba? Because Y is a function of K. So if K is changing, Y is changing. So this is also not just the law of motion of capital, how much capital goes up or down. This is also giving you the growth rate of capital outside of the steady state. Okay? So pag mataas tong investment relative to depreciation, tataas yung K, and mataas rin yung growth rate. Okay. That will happen until you reach the steady state. And when you reach the steady state, K star is no longer growing, and therefore Y, the small y, Y over L is no longer growing. Okay. That's pretty much it. So that's important to note. Okay. So the savings rate will raise growth only temporarily until you reach your K star. And the further away you are from K star, the faster the growth is. And here's the golden rule of capital. So what's a good picture for that? Ito siya. So yung wala dito is the S of f of k. And here, the S of f of k is if you draw a line here, if you draw a curve, it's gonna be this green thing, but shifted down by S, and it's gonna have to intersect delta k here. So if you can draw a curved line from here to there, which intersects this point here, right? So that will determine the K star, and that's the savings rate that will allow you to enjoy this consumption here, which maximizes consumption. Recall that consumption is the difference between output and investment, and in the long run, investment equals your steady state depreciation. So that's why naghahanap ka ng gap between this long line here and this curved line, which is the largest gap, which is at this point. So how do you find this C star? How do you find the K that is consistent with that? It's simple. You just maximize consumption here. And if you do some calculus, you get the first order condition. You get the derivative of F with respect to K, and the derivative of delta K with respect to K. And then you will get the marginal product of capital must equal the depreciation rate, which is why here in this picture, if you notice, the slope at this point is this line here, which is exactly the same slope as the blue line. So that's why they have the same slope. And that is MPK up here. And then delta K, which is the depreciation rate down here. Ito, pinapakita pa niya. This is actually better, right? Because this one is S gold. This is the savings rate that will allow you to hit S gold. Remember, S and K, those are related. The higher the S, the higher the K. So it depends, your K depends on your S. So this S allows you to hit K gold, and K gold is consistent with the golden rule of capital, of the steady state capital. And that's associated with a maximum consumption at the steady state. Okay. So that's pretty much it. Here's finding the golden rule. Here's a numerical example of that, which we did in class. So we'll skip it. And here are examples of what happens when you start with more capital than the golden rule. Syempre, okay, reducing savings will increase savings in the short run, but will tend to lower, I'm sorry, not savings, increase consumption in the short run because you reduced savings. Lower savings means higher consumption in the short run. But because you're starting with more capital than the golden rule, pababa na pababa yung consumption. You can see that also in the picture. And when you're starting with too little capital, you're increasing savings initially, boom, pababa. But then, since you're further away from K-star, tataas yung consumption mo over time. And tataas rin yung output mo over time. Okay. So, the other stuff here are expansions of the solo model. So, in this one, notice that this is the capital accumulation equation, pero dinagdagan ng N. So, now there are two things, delta and N, which will affect the factors that will sort of remove capital per worker. And you're removing it because each worker is growing, right? The denominator is growing. So therefore, since the denominator is growing, bababa ang K over L, that's small k, because by the sheer fact that the denominator is growing. So to make the K constant, you have to add K at least as fast as the denominator is adding L para constant yung K over L. So that will give you break-even investment there. So that's called break-even investment. So the delta means K is dying at this rate. N means that labor is rising at this rate. So in order to keep K constant, you have to also to match the growth rate of labor. That's what this means. And therefore, the steady state is just delta K equal to 0. Same thing, except that now N is not 0, N is some positive number. So what are the effects of population growth? So as N rises, what will happen to your K, your long-run capital? It will go down. Notice that the change in the population growth rate, like a change in the saving rate, has a level effect of income per person, but does not affect the steady state growth rate of income per person. Okay, so that's it. Now, this is the most important part, right? Because right now, wala pa tayong efficiency of labor or technological progress in the model. So now your L is multiplied by E, and E is growing at a certain rate G. So E is sort of like the effective number of workers, and it's like a productivity term for labor. So the higher the E is on a per person basis, the more you can do. Okay, so that's why it's here. It's part of labor basically, and the higher the E is, the higher your Y will be as well. What happens to our capital small k, which is, by the way, this small k is big K over L times E. So capital per effective labor. So that's what small k is here. So what happens to your small k? You're adding to small k with investment, but you're decreasing k because of depreciation, because of labor growth, because of the growth in E, which is G. Right? Okay. So because of that, basically the pictures are exactly the same, except now the break-even investment is delta plus N plus G, and your capital per effective worker is here, K star. And it works exactly the same as the growth rate of labor. However, the effects of technological progress shows how table 8-1 is the most important table here, and it shows 4 key variables that behave in the steady state with technological progress. So we have just seen capital per effective worker, small k is constant in the steady state because small y equals f of k, output per effective worker is also constant. And in the long run, there is no growth basically in output per effective worker. However, we're not interested in output per effective worker. We're interested in output per worker. Okay. So therefore, yung output per worker mo is Y times big E. Now, small y here is growing at rate 0 because we're at the steady state, right? But then E is growing at rate, how fast is E growing? G. So therefore, the Y over L here is growing at rate G, which is output per person is growing at rate G. So baka malito kayo, right? Because the small y here is capital per effective labor, K over EL. But what we're interested in here really is output per worker, not output per effective worker. So that's why output per worker is growing, and it's growing at the rate G, which is the rate of growth of the efficiency of labor. Similarly, GDP is growing at the rate of G and N, right? Because the more labor you've got and the more effective it is, so the faster your GDP growth will be. So in N plus G in the steady state for GDP. Ito yung summary, right? Capital per effective worker, steady state is 0. Output per effective worker is also 0. However, output per worker is growing at rate G, but total output is growing at rate N plus G. Okay, so now let's do some actually wait. Yeah, let's see here. Why don't we do, I don't know if have we done this? Yeah, let's just do this. Let's do problem 1, right? An economy is described by this one. So y equals square root of k. Okay. So for the steady state of y as a function of s, n, g, and delta. Okay. So my first question is this. Etong si k, based on the full solo model, this is the full solo model, right? What is, let's do it. What is small k? Can someone say what is small k? I'm gonna write it here. Everyone. What is small k in the full solo model? So it is capital divided by EL. Can someone explain what this is in words? What is that in words? Oh, what's that in words? Let's see this one. Y equals k raised to 1/2 or 0.5. Okay. What is K over EL? Capital per effective worker. So you need to know what it is. Capital per effective worker. And therefore, Y is also equal to small y equals big Y over EL, right? Or output per effective worker. So what is the, ano yung tanong natin? What is the steady state? So that's the question, right? What is the steady state? What is the steady state? And we get the delta K equation. K equation equals S times K raised to 0.5 minus N plus delta plus G times K. Where did we get this equation? Well, galing siya sa page page. I'm looking for it. It is in. Oh, here we go. Page. Page 223. Right? And pare-pareho lang naman yung capital accumulation. The delta K is always gonna be what's saved from output per person. And then nagbabago lang yung N, delta, and then the G, right? Okay. So what is N? So we have information on N, delta, and G. Well, we don't need that. So the first question is the first question. I'm looking at the first question in chapter 8. I'm not there yet. Okay. Solve for the steady state of y as a function of steady state value of y as a function of s, n, g, and delta. So find y star, which means we need k star, right? Which k star is the steady state, correct? To find y, you need. So all you need to do is to get sk raised to 0.5 minus n delta g k equals what? It's equal to, how do you get the steady state? This has to be equal to ten, 20? What's the magic number? It has to be equal to the steady state means k is not growing. So if k is not growing, then the change in k equation must be equal to 0, right? Diba? 0 for delta k to be 0. So if that's equal to 0, then all you need to do is k raised to 0.5, right? Divided by k must be equal to n and n plus delta plus g divided by what? S. You're just moving things around. With the k's all on the left side and everything that is not k on the right side. So I have a math question. K raised to 1/2 divided by k, that's what? K raised to negative 0.5. Okay, negative 0.5, negative 0.5. Why? Because k in the denominator is basically k1, right? K raised to the first power. And then 1/2 minus 1, that's negative 1/2. That's equal to n. We'll just rewrite it again. N delta plus g divided by s. And then k, therefore, must be, so because this is a negative number, you have to flip the right-hand side. So it's n plus delta, I'm sorry, s, right? S, and then divided by n plus, well, let me just, this is fine. Delta plus g. And then all of that is raised to what? 1/2 or 2? 2 or raised to 1/2? Hmm? Well, you on the left-hand side, this one, k raised to 1/2. You have to raise this to what? To the second power, right? In order to cancel it. So if you recall, how do you know that? So let's do k. If k is raised to the negative 1/2, right? Negative 0.5. Paano mo mawawala yung paano mawawala yung 0.5? You have to raise it by 2, right? Actually, it becomes clearer if it's negative 2. You raise it by 2. Then this becomes k raised to negative 1. And that's why you have to flip it. Yeah, so you raise it by 2. So that's why you raise it by 2. But remember to flip the denominator and numerator because of the negative 1. So S over N plus delta is G. So it makes sense, right? Pag tumaas si S, what happens to K? When S goes up, what happens to K? It increases, right? Okay. Kaya importante na i-flip. Kasi pag hindi mo flip, yung S nasa ilalim. Look at this. Right? That's why you have to flip it. That's why the negative sign is very, very important. But we're not actually done yet because we need Y star. How do you get Y star? Y star is K raised to what? 1/2. And that's K star raised to 1/2. So what is Y? So all of that stuff that we raised to 2 now, you raise it to 1/2. So that becomes S divided by N plus delta plus G. Mawawala rin yung raise to square, right? Because you will get the square root, right? You raise it by 2, but you get the square root, so it becomes raised to 1. So it all becomes this in the end. Yeah. Okay. And then at this point, you can also do a bonus question. Let's do this and then let's end. What is the golden rule? Golden rule level of K. Okay. So that's when you get MPK, which is, what's MPK here? 1/2, 1/2, sorry, 1/2 times K raised to negative 1/2, right? That's the marginal, that's the first derivative of this one. That's the first derivative of this one. And then that has to be equal to what? No, ito na yun. So this is, remember, it's marginal product of capital. So balik tayo dito sa book. Where is the golden rule? The golden rule is, you can just memorize these. But it should be clear. Here. MPK equals delta plus N plus G. And this comes from page 225. Okay. From page 225. MPK, or MP, small letter, MPK equals delta plus N plus G. So this one is MPK, and then you have to equate that to delta plus N plus G. And that's from page 225. Okay. But if you notice, there's all, between chapter 7 and chapter 8, they're literally just the same. Yung differences lang is that N and delta and G, those are different. So pansin nyo, we're always adding, right? The first model, walang N, walang G. The second one is walang G, and then the last one is, it's the complete one. This is the complete solo model, basically. And okay, I said that we would end with that, but not really. The thing that we would end is, ano ang growth rate ng Y, which is big Y over EL? Ang growth rate na to is 0 because delta K, remember delta K is in fact 0, and therefore small y over EL. But what happens to Y over EL? Y over EL is small y times E. So what's the growth in Y times E? So Y is growing at rate 0, but E is growing at rate what? What's the rate of growth of E? Anyone? There's only 3 letters here, N, delta, and G. What is the growth rate in E? N, delta, or G? Anyone? Is it N? Or delta, or G? It's not N because N is the growth rate in labor. Delta is the depreciation rate. Therefore, E is growing at rate G, which is the technological progress. So the growth in output per Y over L. Yeah. Y over L is small y times E, and then that's equal to G. Remember that Y over EL growth is 0, but Y over L is small y times E, and the growth is the rate of technological progress. There we go. Okay. So I'll pause there. That's pretty much it. In addition to that, merong mga Microsoft Word stuff that's been uploaded, and I will add one last video at the end of the day. But that's pretty much it. That's the end of the course. I'll wait for a few more minutes, go my questions. But that's pretty much it. And good luck. See you guys on the 15th. Yes, go ahead. My question, see. Oh.
So yung coverage ng finals is yung chapters 5, 12, 13, 17, tapos yung 3 yung nasa Word documents.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Exactly. My feedback. Feedback, back. I'm just kidding. Okay, I'll also stop the recording. Is this thing still even recording? Oh yeah, it is. Stop.